Greetings, my friends. It's been a while. I've been playing a lot of Dota recently, and I've had the creative urge to write a guide for one of my favorite heroes of the patch, 7.29D at the time of writing. That hero is Darkseer. I've basically played like 3 heroes up to 6.3k MMR, and Darkseer is the hero I've been playing the most. So I thought it could be useful for anyone out there aspiring to learn the hero, or anyone who just wants free MMR, for me to compress my thoughts into video format like I used to do, and talk about what I've been doing to have as much success as I have been having with him. When to pick. To begin, I don't really look for reasons to pick Darkseer, but rather I try to find reasons not to pick him. Spoiler alert, there aren't many reasons not to pick Darkseer this patch. Mostly my decision to pick him comes down to my ability to answer the 2 following questions. Question 1. Do I have a melee 4? Question 2. Do I suspect my team will be able to operate effectively without my hero offering a hard form of initiation, especially during the early stages of the mid-game? Not coincidentally, most of the time the answer to both of these questions is the same. This is because most melee 4 positions offer some form of hard initiation. Regardless, if I answer yes to both, it's an easy Darkseer game. If the answer to one or more of these questions is no, you might consider reevaluating your pick for reasons we'll divulge later. I feel like I should now mention that on my stream, twitch.tv/wireguitar by the way, I will often try picking Darkseer regardless of whether or not it's a hard game because I enjoy the challenge of making him work where he probably shouldn't. Starting items and laning philosophy. Alright, so we've identified that it's a good game to whip out the old Seer, but what are your starting items and what lane are you going to? This guide focuses on playing Darkseer in the offlane as a core, and as such, our starting items are tailored towards helping us trade hits while getting last hits. In most games, I start with the 2 stat boosting components of Null Talisman, 1 set of tangos and 3 mangoes. With Bounty Rune Gold, I usually like to ferry either more tangos or a salve. Our goal in the lane phase is to get a Null Talisman in a bottle as early as possible, ferrying regen as needed to help us obtain these. I should also mention that we would really like a magic stick, however if it's not a good lane for a magic stick, you can delay this until the beginning of the mid game. Null Talisman gives us everything that we want. The passive mana regen helps us sustain Ion Shell usage throughout the lane, but the stats this item provides are insane. It gives us nearly half the damage a Quelling Blade does, but that damage works on our right clicks against heroes and denies as well as enemy creeps, giving us better lane control and harass potential. Spell Amp is also a really underrated stat on the Seer given how well Ion Shell scales with it. Bottle is an especially potent item on Darkseer because of how the hero succeeds in the lane. You're constantly leveraging your mana to control the lane with Ion Shell, and you're naturally inclined to want to trade right clicks with the enemy given your already high base damage and base armor. Bottle helps us sustain our mana and health in the lane, and we can get it refilled if our mid doesn't need the bounty rune closest to us, or if someone TPs to our lane from Fountain. Just make sure to let them know that they need an empty inventory slot before you give them the bottle. After Bottle, we're going to want to rush Arcane Boots, and with Arcane Boots, Bottle, and Null Talisman, that should curve out our mana sustain issues until the mid-game. This seems like a good time to segue into skill progression and how to press your buttons effectively. In 99% of your games, you should skill Ion Shell at level 1 and look to use it on 2 of your melee creeps before they meet the opponent's creeps and lanes. Ever since 7.29, Darkseer became a potent combatant in level 1 rune engagements, however, so be sure to assist your team in those engagements should they come up. It should also be stated that there are niche cases where Vacuum and Surge can get you a first blood where Ion Shell can't, but skilling either of these can ruin your lane, so I wouldn't really recommend doing that unless you really know what you're doing. In any case, assuming nothing happened at the runes, place your first Ion Shell on a melee creep that isn't walking in front when the creeps are reaching your tier 1 tower. Then place your second shell on the other creep not leading the charge when the waves meet. Your goal in a typical Darkseer game is to push your first wave into the enemy tower, walk past the tower with your main hero, and then drag the enemy's second creep wave into the small camp before the 1-minute spawn timer to block the camp. What makes this achievable usually comes down to how well your position 4 can assist you in bullying the enemy 5. In games where you have a Clockwork, Nyx Assassin, or Earth Spirit on your team, Ion Shell plus their hero's level 1 is usually enough to bully a position 5 out of messing with you while you accomplish this task. You might not even need to Ion Shell them. Regardless, your top priority should be grabbing their oncoming wave and blocking the enemy's easy camp before it has the chance to spawn as mentioned earlier. Once you accomplish this, drag their creeps over to just outside your tower and then proceed to run around until your creeps meet with theirs. Careful not to let their range creep collide with your melee creeps. Our goal here is to create a new equilibrium for the lane directly outside your tier 1, giving you access to easier last hits that you don't even need to use Ion Shell for, and the tower's armor and health regeneration buff. This makes laning significantly easier for Darkseer and usually sets him up to gain the most important thing that he cares about from the lane, which are levels. It should be stated that sometimes walking past the tower to grab the enemy creep wave can be suicidal, especially if you accidentally draw tower aggro and the enemy team has a strong safe lane duo combo. An easy way to remedy this is to simply ask your 4 position to be in position to grab the second creep wave and drag it to outside your tower. If your position 4 is soaking experience at this point, you should kindly ask them not to, as you would really prefer to hit level 3 as quickly as possible. If your position 4 is wondering what they should be doing, tell them to find the enemy position 5 and generally just be a nuisance to whatever it is that they're trying to do. Or you can attempt to Ion Shell them and go and kill the enemy carry. You should be heading level 2 right now, and both Vacuum and Surge can create strong scenarios to kill the enemy carry if they walk too far forward in lane. If you don't think that you can accomplish this, simply hold your skill point and inform your 4 that they should be finding the enemy 5. Tell them to block pulls, trade hits, zone the enemy from the lane, whatever it takes to make sure that Darkseer has a 1v1 situation against the enemy carry, because he usually wins those early on in the game. By the way, generally speaking, at level 2, you should hold your skill point until you absolutely need to skill whichever skill that you identify you need for that situation. Continue playing the lane in this fashion, leveling Ion Shell whenever possible. In most games, skilling all of your basic abilities by level 4 is the best way to play the hero, as they can all be used to control the lane, evade threats, and pressure the enemy effectively. You typically look to skill your ultimate at level 6, as it can set up for some potent dives on the enemy if you know what you're doing. Don't underestimate Darkseer's ability to get a solo kill at level 6. So long as you have enough mana for 2 shells, wall, and vacuum, you can kill most heroes in the game if you get a little creative. It's all about conditioning the enemy. Cast Ion Shell on yourself and approach the creep wave. When the enemy carry approaches the creep wave, vector target the wall in such a way that it hits the enemy carry and cuts off their retreat. Put Ion Shell on the illusion that you just spawned of them, and at this point I usually just follow command the enemy carry with my main hero and illusion, as the damage Ion Shell does is more than my right click or the illusion's right click, and I want to make sure that in case they start running away, I am always within range for Shell's damage instances to be ticking on the enemy. If they stand their ground, you can begin right clicking them, and funnily enough, many players don't respect the damage output of 2 level 3 Ion Shells combined with Darkseer's right click and their hero's illusion. In these situations, the kill is usually pretty easy. If they begin to run, try to vacuum them back into the center of the wall to maximize the effectiveness of its slow, surging after them as needed with your main hero or illusion of them. Getting into the mid game, Darkseer's general gameplay philosophy is to continue pressuring the enemy safe lane until the tier 1 falls. Then, take over the enemy's top side of the map when their tier 1 falls, until you get your first major item. Darkseer's ability to rotate can be rather lackluster with low levels of vacuum and no true hard disable, so Ion Shelling creeps and yourself to accelerate your own game will prove more fruitful than TPing to a lane to try to force a gank. Your first major item usually wants to be a mech or pipe, and I typically lean towards pipe in my games, as the item usually enables me to play that beefy frontliner that my team needs more so than mech. Obviously, the choice between these two should be game dependent. For instance, against dispellable silences like Orchid Purchasers and Silencer, I will be more inclined towards a mech that I can build into Greaves. Also, in some games where my team doesn't need a full-on pipe, but I still want some form of magic resistance, I'll either get a casual cloak or an eternal shroud for myself. Either way, I want to make sure that my first item on Darkseer enables me to fulfill that beefy frontliner role on the team. After your first big purchase, you usually need to think about utility. I found Aeon Disc to be an amazing item on Darkseer, as it enables you to play very recklessly for your team while still enabling you to get your spells off in a team fight. Furthermore, your illusions still do damage even while Aeon Disc's effect is taking place on your hero. If I don't need to be a frontliner, then perhaps I need to be an initiator, and items like Blink Dagger help me accomplish that. A quick tip that a lot of Darkseer players overlook, and one that we'll get into way too much detail with the Enigma Guide, is to be cautious with your vacuum usage, especially when you have Blink. Especially when you have Wall of Replica available. Using vacuum to secure range creeps in the early game and to accelerate your farm in the early stages of the mid game before you start grouping can be permissible, but due to its cooldown being 30 seconds at max rank, and even longer at earlier ranks, the skill is simply too prohibitive to use casually when your team wants to start grouping up and securing objectives. When vacuum is on cooldown, you're basically half of your hero's normal strength. This rule applies to Wall of Replica as well, but I suspect that that fact is more obvious than how it applies to vacuum. Stress patience with vacuum and you will be rewarded. Aghanim Scepter can also be really broken on Darkseer, as it does just about everything you could want from an item. It makes you tankier through the stats it provides, helps you farm through the increased duration of shell and the increased number of shell usages, helps you fight for the aforementioned reasons and the fact that the shell now provides the hero with a 300 bonus max HP. I mean, Ags It gives you 5 active shells on your team at once, all providing 300 max HP and a 90 DPS or 150 with the talent Radiance type burn to heroes that are within melee range of that hero. However, I consider Aghanim's luxury over the aforementioned items, or even something like a Lotus Orb, simply because it does not fundamentally change the way the Darkseer plays. It just makes him better at doing what he was already doing and suddenly begins taxing his mana reserve. Speaking of that, we should start talking about some heroes to look out for as Darkseer. Though I'd be hesitant to call anyone on this list an outright counter, since everyone I list you can play around, they do require special consideration on a game-to-game basis. Heroes that can drain mana or dispel illusions are annoying to play against as Darkseer. The reasons for this should be obvious. You're a hero with 4 active abilities, 2 of which have good uptime if you have the mana for them, and you're also heavily dependent on the illusions you summon in a team fight for the damage and overall chaos that you provide. A special shout out should go to Lion here, as he's a hero that can do both, drain your mana and dispel your illusions rather effectively in a team fight, especially with his Aghanim Shard. A good way to play around him is to stress to your team that Lion needs to be the first person to die in a team fight. He's usually a squishy support that provides a lot of CC, so he's typically a good focus target anyways. And you can buy items like Blink Dagger and Aghanim Shard and Aeon Disc to deal with him yourself. Another annoying thing to deal with as Darkseer is heroes with a Dispel. In case you didn't know, Ion Shell is considered a debuff that you place on an enemy, so is Surge, and a buff when it's placed on an ally. Again, same with Surge. You can't actually surge enemies, but regardless. In both instances, it can be dispelled, and for this reason, heroes like Oracle and Troll Warlord with his Aghanim Scepter are particularly annoying because both of these heroes have access to low cooldown AoE dispels. Blink and Aghanim Shard again work as strong solvent to these heroes, as this potent combo of items allows you to Blink Punch those heroes and enable your team to follow up on them. You'll have to lean less on Ion Shell as a means of dealing damage, and more so on your other abilities and the illusions that you summon. However, in my experience, this is usually enough to bring them down. In lane, heroes like Anti-Mage and Morphling can be real bullies, as both of these heroes don't care as much about Ion Shell's damage, and they can trade hits with you rather effectively. While again, I don't consider these heroes to be outright counters, since Wall of Replica is so insanely effective against both of these heroes, they do require you to play the lane differently. Especially if they're paired with a hero like Oracle, you should consider jungling when you hit level 3 and giving the lane to your 4 position. In this case, Soul Ring can be a good alternative to bottles since it provides more mana over time, and you won't be getting your bottle refilled from your 4 TPing into lane because you're jungling. Since we mentioned Aghanim Shard earlier, I'd like to spend a brief moment talking about the item now. The most recent buffs they gave it made it more reliable and impactful. The 2 biggest things holding the item back at the moment are, 1. The targets that you want to use it on will often have decent evasion, making the item feel clunky and irrelevant. And 2. It doesn't pierce spell immunity, which means that you're playing into one of Darkseer's biggest weaknesses even harder. I still think the item is a good addition to your kit if you have a blink and are looking for more reliable initiation, especially if the enemy carry doesn't have evasion. Just know that if they do have evasion, you'll likely need to use this on a support instead, which it's still quite effective at doing. Refresher is another late game item I want to touch on, simply because of how broken it can be with your level 25 talent, Parallel Wall. This item alone makes fights a breeze, but with the level 25 talent, they almost become unlosable. You provide so much zonal control over an area with slows and potentially 4 illusions of the enemy carry that each deal as much, maybe more, damage than he does, depending on which talent you took. This is where the skill ceiling of Darkseer skyrockets, and you can literally solo carry games if you play your hero right. As long as we're on the topic, I think all of Darkseer's talents are good enough to take. That being said, I usually skip skilling the level 10 talent until I hit level 14, when I've maxed out all of my basic abilities. I should also mention that I rarely skill level 2 Wall until I hit level 16 for the same reason. To divulge that reason a little further, Darkseer's basic abilities scale so incredibly well with levels that they are often worth more than what your level 10 talent and level 2 Wall can provide. This holds especially true in games where the mana cost for Wall doubling can be prohibitive towards you actually being able to cast that spell or just other spells in general in teamfight. As a brief side note, since we didn't cover this earlier, I alternate between leveling Vacuum and Surge once I've maxed out Ion Shell, unless there is a specific reason why one might be better than the other within the context of the game. If I have an Ursa or Wraith King that gets kited easily on my team, I might max out Surge first. However, if we're fighting often in the mid game and my carry player isn't participating, and I don't have anybody on my team that gets particularly kited, I might max out Vacuum first. It's all dependent on the needs of the game, and you'll become more adept at making these decisions as you play the hero more. When I am ready to skill my talents, I tend to lean towards the Ion Shell Radius talent at level 10 unless I feel like my team can't really use Ion Shell to its maximum effectiveness. At level 15, I used to swear by the Vacuum Radius talent. It's very good at catching backliners, especially those that like to channel spells that need to be interrupted, like Witch Doctor or Warlock. The illusion damage talent is a strong one, though, as it helps you scale into the early stages of the late game, especially against heroes like Terrorblade after he's used Metamorphosis, Anti-Mage, Drow Ranger, and the such like. At level 20, I almost always go the Ion Shell damage talent, as it really helps you push out waves and have relevant damage going into the late game. However, the wall cooldown talent is also insanely powerful, as it enables you to fight quite often, similar to other heroes, such as Mars and Legion Commander. At level 25 for solo queue pub games, I think the Parallel Wall talent is the best choice, and also one of the best level 25 upgrades to a hero in the game. As we briefly spoke about earlier, this talent turns you from an already strong team fighter into an absolute monster and lets you solo carry games. To speak more about how we should be approaching fights, in the mid game we usually want to frontline for our team. Our item decisions should enable us to accomplish this. However, if we cannot for whatever reason, try to play him like a counter initiator. The threat of Darkseer is felt most like how a support plays team fights. The more you're able to cast spells, the more likely it is that your team will win the fight. Obviously, you can't cast spells when you're dead, so frontlining for your team should be something you do only if you're confident you can do so without dying. But to be clear, Darkseer does want to be able to fulfill this role, as his contribution to teamfights as a solo initiator is rather lacking. Similar to an Underlord, your ability to start a fight in the mid-game is rather lacking, but your ability to force a particular issue or objective is quite strong. If you're playing your hero right, the enemy team should basically only be able to go on you, but never feel good about it. Lastly, I'll talk about neutral item philosophy for a bit. While neutral item spawns are completely random, some are better than others, especially on Darkseer. At tier 1, we have a lot of winners. Fairy Trinket, Arcane Ring both help curve out your mana issues. Keen Optic does much the same and also provides you with a smidge of cast range for Wall and Vacuum. Ocean's Heart is a strictly better version of Ironwood Tree because it gives you some conditional yet effective regeneration. Faded Brooch is amazing for those times the Surge is on cooldown or needs to be used on somebody else. Chipped Vest helps you farm. But my favorite neutral item from tier 1 has to be Shovel. Mangoes, Salves, and Bounty Runes that we can bottle are all fantastic on Darkseer, and I'm still waiting for the day that someone digs up a Kobold and shells it while running away from an enemy. At tier 2, we have Bullwhip, Essence Ring, and Dragon Scale, providing some incredible regen, tankiness, and utility. Pupil's Gift and Vambrace are solid choices too for much the same reason, since you can drop them on the ground before using Stick or Bottle, and then pick them back up for some more regen. Quicksilver Amulet and Ring of Aquila can be useful to you as well, but are probably desired by your other cores too much for you to have dibs. Nether Shawl plus whatever item you built Hood into practically makes you immune to magic damage. Essence Ring for me wins out at this tier, simply because of how much regen it gives you and how tanky it makes you. Oh, and since I know someone will ask, Shiva's Guard is a fine item on Darkseer, especially if you're against heroes that deal a lot of physical damage, like Juggernaut, Drow Ranger, Legion Commander, or heroes like Alchemist and Huskar that use in-combat sustain as their primary form of survivability. Usually I feel like there are other more impactful items that I could purchase at that price point, but rarely does it feel wrong. At tier 3, the Ceremonial Robes, Cloak of Flames, Elven Tunic, although good luck getting that from your carry, Psychic Headband, Quickening Charm, and even Spider Legs are all great choices. My personal favorite is probably the Quickening Charm because I very much enjoy cooldown reduction on this hero. At tier 4 we have Flicker, Minotaur Horn, although good luck getting that from your carry, Ninja Gear, again good luck getting that from your carry, Spell Prism, even Stormcrafter can be good, Telescope, and Trickster's Cloak. But the all-time best choice here, and probably better than most tier 5 items as well, is without a doubt Illusionist's Cape. This item is crazy on Darkseer. Fun fact, it amps the damage that all of your illusions do from wall. This item belongs on Darkseer, and you should consider taking it over your carry, even if your carry is somebody like a TB or a Morphling, because it's simply that powerful on this hero. Then at tier 5, we have Book of Shadows, Book of the Dead, Ex Machina, Fallen Sky, Force Boots, Giant's Ring, Mirror Shield, Seer Stone. I mean, come on, you're Darkseer, it's your stone, right? My personal favorite from this tier has probably got to be Fallen Sky, but all of these items are pretty insane on Darkseer, as long as you even make it to this point in the game to begin with. And that's it. I believe that covers everything I wanted to talk about in this guide. If you like this content, be sure to subscribe for more. I will be posting guides on heroes that I play in Dota 2 pretty regularly now that I have a lot of free time. Go ahead and follow my Twitch stream as well at twitch.tv/wireguitar. Any relevant social media links that I think that you should get involved in are going to be posted down below. And yeah, definitely be sure to ask any questions that you might have regarding something that you feel I didn't cover in this guide down below as well. I will be sure to stay active in the comment section. So yeah, have a great one and take care.